So over the last few days or whatever, we've been building this simple frame. Okay. Today what we're going to talk about is how we can kind of organize the stuff that's in a frame. All right. So if I go ahead and run this, okay, mine shows up like this. Now, the reason that it shows up like this is because I'm using set size down here. So I'm making this frame show up so that it has a width of 300 and a height of 200. Make sense so far? Okay. I can resize this because right now it looks pretty ugly, right? So I want to make it look a little bit better. I can resize it. I can move things around. So if I think that that looks good, I can do that. If I think that that looks good, I can do that. If I think that that looks good, I can do that. Okay? And so you notice that the components that are in the frame, the labels and the text fields and the buttons, those are called components. Those are all kind of flowing in to that frame. Okay? And so that's because we're using this thing called a flow layout. So we're saying we want to make things flow in. All right? We're going to learn two other layouts. All right? And I'm just going to click over here. So that's flow layout. The other two layouts that we're going to learn are grid layout and border layout. Okay? Grid layout does just what it says. It makes things fit into a grid. So we want to, like a table. Okay? So we're going to have to tell that thing, we want 3 rows and we want four columns, or we want 3 rows and 2 columns, or we want 5 rows and 7 columns, whatever makes sense. Okay? So you tell it how many rows and columns you want, and then things fit into that space. All right? So going back to the code, all we're going to do to change this, okay, is we're going to go here and say, now I want this thing to be a grid layout. Okay? So we got to import grid layout. Sorry about that. Just let me mouse over this guy. All right, we're going to import grid layout. And then what we want to do is we want to put in there what the parameters are. We want to know how many rows. So I'm going to say I want 3 rows because, again, if I had this thing looking like this, right, there would be 1, 2, 3 rows, okay? And then I have 1, 2 columns that I'm basically putting things into. So I'm going to say that this is a 3 by 2 grid layout. All right? And just making that change makes it so that when I run this thing and I create the frame, it looks, in my mind, a lot better. Okay? Now, that looks kind of too wide, and that's again because I'm using this set size, and what you guys are using is not set size, but you're using pack. Okay? And what pack does is it basically goes and asks all the things that are added to the frame. So the first name label, text field, last name label and text field, and the button goes and asks them like, hey, how big do you need to be? Okay? And then it sets the size according to how big those things need to be. So if I run this again, it looks like that. That looks a little bit better. Okay? But you see here that it's in a grid. And if I expand this, notice how things aren't flowing the way that they were before in the flow layout. They're staying in that grid. 3 rows, 2 columns. All right? So that's the grid layout. Okay? So let's just say, for example, like that I wanted to add a button here. All right? So I have a say hello button. Let's go ahead and create a say goodbye button. Okay? So we're going to go J button by B equals new J button, right? Say goodbye, right? And then I want to add the buy button on, so I'm going to go down here where I'm adding everything, this dot add, after the hello button, this dot add buy button. All right. So I'm running it again, and you can see that the say goodbye button just fits into that grid. Okay? Yeah. Yeah, the order matters. So that's a good question. So if I said like, let's say I screwed up and I said, well, I think the buy button should go right there, right? Run that again, and it looks pretty disorganized, right? So you got to keep it in mind, like which order things should go in. Okay? So that's a grid layout, and you can set whatever you want your grid to be. So again, like if it's 7 by 2 or 7 by 3 or whatever makes sense, you just make that up. Okay? The next kind of layout is called a border layout. And a border layout lays things out like this. Okay? So you can tell something, I want you to go in the north, I want you to go in the center, I want you to go in the east. Okay? And then if you do that sort of thing, like say that we don't use the west, then the west won't show up and the center will just take over for it. Okay? So the center is always going to be like the biggest thing. All right? So we're going to talk about how we do that with a border layout. Okay? So let's go back to the code, and I'm just going to change this again. And we're going to say now instead of a grid layout, we want a border layout. Import that. Okay? And now, if I just run it right away, it looks like this. So that's obviously not what we want that thing to look like. Okay? And so what happens when you just add things to something that has a border layout is it just keeps adding to the center. All right? And you saw it in the first example where we said, like, if I add something and then add another thing, it kicks the other one out, right? And so that's why we had to add a layout. And now we're seeing that this is first name L, that's going to the center. And then first name TF goes to the center and kicks the label out. Kicks the text field out, kicks the label out, kicks the text field out, and then finally we get the goodbye button, and it's the last thing we added, so that's the last thing we see. It kicked everything else out. Okay? So when we're using a border layout, we got to tell the component where we want it to go. All right? And the way you do that is after you add the thing that you're trying to add, you just put a comma, and then you go border layout dot, and I'm just going to go from top to bottom, left to right. So I'm going to go north. That label is going to go in the north. Okay. This thing's going to go in the west. This thing's going to go in the center. This thing's going to go in the east. This thing's going to go in the south. Okay? Border layout only has 5 places that I can put things. So that means that my goodbye button is kind of left out to dry. All right? So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to comment that out for now. We're going to look at how this looks. Okay? So that's how it looks in a border layout. Now, it doesn't look good. Okay, but I want to show you that that really is a border layout. You see how that matches that picture? Okay? So this is the north up here, west over here, south over here, etc. Okay? Now, you got that picture in your head. Let's see what happens when I just add the buy button. Okay? So now I'm just going to add the buy button. I'm not going to show it where to go. Where do you guys think it's going to go? Okay, I think it's going to go in the center. All right, good. So there it is, right? We got the say hello button down here in the south still. That's where I told it to go. I didn't tell the buy button where to go, so where did it go? Into the center, right? So that is a button there. You guys get it? Okay. So what I would like to be able to do is tell the buy button where to go. Okay, so let's just say, for example, that I tell it to go into the south. What do you think is going to happen? It's going to kick out the hello button, right? Okay. So now it just says say goodbye, right? Which isn't as friendly as being able to say hello. All right? So we need to learn how we can get two things to be added in the same spot. And that's the next lesson.